The studio lights were so bright that I could barely see the people sitting beyond the cameras. I could see the red light above the main camera. I could see the host looking at me. I could hear the quiet movement of papers on the desk. And I could hear my own voice through the small monitor beside me, slightly delayed, so that it felt like listening to someone else speak with my mouth. The host leaned toward me. "So you are saying Jesus has no place in your life?" I smiled, not because the question was funny, because I knew exactly what answer everyone expected from me. I had been asked versions of this question before, in boardrooms, at dinners, in private conversations where men speak carefully because they are not sure who is listening. I had always answered the same way, without hesitation, without apology. The answer was not something I had to think about. It was something I wore, the way I wore the jacket I had chosen that morning, dark, well-fitted, chosen to communicate something specific. I adjusted the cuff of my jacket and looked directly into the camera. No, the word came out easily. The host waited. I continued. "Jesus cannot save me." There was a small reaction from the audience. Someone breathed out loudly. A few people shifted in their seats. The host looked surprised, even though I think he had expected something close to that answer. I could see it in the way he paused before writing anything on the card in front of him. He had prepared for this. He had just not prepared for how flat and calm the delivery would be. There was no anger in my voice, no defensiveness, no performance, just a statement. The way a person states something they have known for a long time and no longer need to argue about. I could feel the warmth from the lights against my face. My hands were resting on the table. They were steady. That part matters. My hands were completely steady. The host asked, "You don't believe Jesus is the Son of God?" I looked toward the camera again, not at the host, at the lens. Because I knew who I was actually speaking to. It was not the man across the desk. It was everyone watching at home who had been told that a man like me should not be allowed to say something like this on a platform like this one. I believe what I was raised to believe. Then I leaned back. I could hear a few people clapping. It was not loud. It did not need to be. I knew what they were thinking. They were watching a man with a respected name speak with confidence on a subject that most men in my position would have avoided entirely. They were watching someone refuse to perform uncertainty. And I liked that. I liked the way the room changed when I spoke. I liked knowing that people were listening. I liked the feeling of the chair beneath me, solid and expensive, and the knowledge that I had been invited to sit in it. The host asked another question. I answered, then another. I answered that one too. And when he asked me about Christians who believed Jesus had personally appeared to them, I gave a short laugh. It came from the chest. Easy. The laugh of a man who is not threatened. I said, "People see what they want to see." That received more laughter. I smiled again. Then I said the sentence that would follow me long after the cameras were turned off. "If Jesus is real, he can come and tell me himself." The audience laughed. The host laughed. I laughed with them. I settled back into the chair. I could feel the fabric of the cushion against my back. I could feel the faint vibration of the air conditioning somewhere above. I could smell the slight heat of the stage lights, that warm electrical smell that fills a television studio when the equipment has been running for hours. The red light above the camera remained on, and for several seconds, I enjoyed every second of it. My name is Zaid Al-Harbi. I am 42 years old. I was born into a family with a name that opened doors in Saudi Arabia and well beyond it. I was educated privately, then at university. Then I was trained in business and investment at a level that most people do not see. I spent my adult years managing private wealth, advising powerful people, and sitting in rooms where very large decisions were made. I was not a man who doubted himself. I was not a man who asked for help. I was not a man who needed to be corrected. That was who I was when I sat under those studio lights. That is the man you need to understand before you understand what came after. The interview continued for another 20 minutes. I answered questions about business, politics, faith, family, the kind of questions people ask when they want to know what a powerful person thinks. I was comfortable. I knew how to sit. I knew when to smile. I knew when to pause before answering. I knew how to make a sentence sound stronger by saying fewer words. I had learned that in rooms full of men who had more money than patience, and you learned quickly in those rooms how to be worth listening to. That was the life I understood. Control the room, control the conversation, control yourself. The interview ended. The red light went off. The host stood up. People around the studio began moving at once. Someone removed a microphone from my jacket. Another person handed me my phone. A producer came over and said, "That was strong." I nodded. "Good." Another man shook my hand. "You made your point." I smiled. "Yes." I walked toward the private exit. There were people waiting outside. Security, staff, a few reporters. Someone called my name. I kept walking. I remember thinking that the interview had gone exactly the way I wanted. That was the thought I carried with me when I got into the car. Exactly the way I wanted. My driver closed the door. The city moved past the window. Buildings, traffic lights, cars, people crossing the road. I opened my phone. The interview was already being shared. Clips were appearing. My sentence was everywhere. Jesus cannot save me. I watched one clip, then another. Then I put the phone down. I was not ashamed. I was pleased. That is the truth. I was pleased. I believed I had shown strength. I believed I had protected my name. I believed I had said what a man in my position was supposed to say. Then my phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was one of my business partners. I answered, "Hello?" He did not speak for a few seconds. Then he said, "We have a problem." I sat up. "What kind?" "The Australian account." I waited. The bank froze the transfer. I frowned. "Why?" "We don't know yet." "Call them." "We already did." "And?" "They want documents." "What documents?" "More than we expected." I looked out the window. "Send me everything." He said, "There is more." I closed my eyes. "What?" "There is a second issue with the investment company." "What issue?" He lowered his voice. "Someone has made a complaint." I opened my eyes. "Against whom?" "Against us." The car continued through traffic. I watched a bus pass beside us. "Who?" He gave me a name. I knew the man. I had trusted him. I had sat across from him at a table and shaken his hand, and believed, completely believed, that he was someone I could rely on. I said nothing. My partner asked, "Are you there?" "Yes." "What should we do?" I looked at the city outside. The buildings were tall. The streets were full. Everything outside that window looked exactly the way it had always looked, which made what I was hearing feel wrong, in a way that was difficult to locate. "Do not do anything without me." That was the beginning, not the collapse, the beginning. Over the next few days, the calls did not stop. One account, then another. A contract was questioned. A partner disappeared. A man who had called me every morning for 3 years stopped answering. Then another. I flew to Sydney because I believed I could fix it myself. That is the kind of man I was. I did not send someone. I went. I arrived with 2 suitcases and 3 phones. I left the airport surrounded by people who were supposed to help me. Within a week, most of them were gone, one by one. No dramatic goodbye. No final argument. Just silence. Messages unanswered. Calls ignored. Doors that had always opened suddenly stayed closed. There is a particular feeling that comes when a person you have given years of trust to simply stops responding. It is not like an argument. An argument has weight. An argument has sound. This was the opposite. This was the feeling of pressing your hand against a wall you had always believed was solid and feeling it give way slowly without falling. I spent nights at the property outside the city. The house was large, too large for one person. It had been chosen for a different kind of life. A life with staff, with guests, with the kind of movement and noise that fills a big space and makes it feel like it belongs to someone. Now it was just me. And the space felt like exactly what it was. A large empty structure with furniture that no one was using. There were rooms I did not enter. There were lights I did not turn on. There was food in the kitchen that I never touched. My phone kept vibrating against every surface I placed it on. Tables, counters, the arm of a chair. I stopped answering. Then one evening, another message came. The investment was gone. Not delayed, not frozen, gone. I read the message twice. Then I placed the phone on the table face down. I stood there for a long time. The room was quiet. I walked to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator. The cold air came out. I looked inside. I could see shelves of food. None of it was what I wanted, though I could not have told you what I wanted. I closed the door. Then I opened it again. I stood there with my hand on the handle and the cold air on my face, and I stared at the contents of that refrigerator as if they could tell me something useful. They could not. I walked back to the living room. My phone vibrated again. I did not touch it. Then it stopped. For the first time that day, there was no sound. I sat down. My jacket was still on. My shoes were still on. The chair was facing the window, and outside the window there was a garden I had never walked through, and beyond the garden there was a low wall, and beyond the wall there was the beginning of the path that led down to the water. I could not see the water from here, but I knew it was there. I had heard it every night since I arrived. I had been sitting in that same chair for almost an hour when I noticed the television was still showing the news. I had not turned it on deliberately. It must have been on when I came in, and I had never turned it off. My interview appeared on the screen. There I was, sitting under bright studio lights, smiling, saying the words again, "Jesus cannot save me." I watched myself for a moment. The way I held the jacket cuff, the angle of my chin, the ease in my face. I looked like a man who had never been uncertain about anything in his life. I reached for the remote. I turned it off. The screen went black and I could see myself in the reflection, smaller, sitting alone in a dark room in a house that was not mine, in a city that was not my home, in a country where the people who were supposed to be helping me had stopped returning my calls. I stayed in the chair. Then something happened that I did not understand. I heard my own voice in my head. Not the voice from the television, not the polished, controlled voice I used when people were watching. My actual voice, the one underneath. And it was saying the sentence I had spoken as a joke. If Jesus is real, he can come and tell me himself. I had said it for the audience. I had said it the way you say something when you are certain of the reaction. I had said it because I knew it would land well, because I knew it would get exactly the response it got, because it was the kind of line a confident man delivers and then moves on from. But sitting in that dark room, with my jacket still on and my shoes still on, and the refrigerator still cold in the other room, and 37 missed calls on my phone, and an investment gone, and the names of men I had trusted now meaning something very different to me than they had 3 months ago, the sentence did not sound like a joke anymore. I opened my eyes. I looked around the room. Nothing. I stood up. My legs felt heavier than they should have. I walked to the window. Outside, the wind was moving through the trees. Not strongly, just enough to make the leaves move in one direction and then the other. The ocean was somewhere beyond the darkness, beyond the garden and the wall and the path. I could not see it, but I could hear it faintly. I put on a coat. I left the house. I walked without a direction in mind. The ground outside was uneven. Gravel at first, then grass, then the path that led down toward the water. It was cold, the kind of cold that gets into your collar no matter how high you pull it. My shoes were not made for walking on wet ground. I could hear them on the path, that slight sound of leather on damp stone, each step deliberate because the ground was dark and I could not see clearly. I could hear the trees moving. I could hear the water getting louder the further I walked. And I could feel the mist before I even reached the sand, that faint wet weight in the air that settles on your face and your hands and slowly, without you noticing, soaks into everything you are wearing. I reached the edge of the sand and stopped. The beach stretched out ahead of me in both directions. The sky above was dark with clouds, no stars. The ocean was moving, steady and heavy, the way it moves when there is no moon to show you where the water ends, white at the edge where the waves broke. Dark beyond that. I could feel the mist from the waves on my face. It was cold against my skin. My hands were in my pockets. I stood there and looked at the water and felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Empty. Not sad, not angry, not afraid. Empty. Like a room after everyone has left it. I had spent years filling every hour with something: a call to make, a meeting to prepare for, a flight to catch, a room to walk into, a name to use, a chair to sit in, a sentence to say that would make everyone believe I was exactly who I appeared to be. I had been very good at it. I had been so good at it that I had almost forgotten it was something I was doing. It had stopped feeling like a performance. It had started feeling like the truth. And now there was nothing. No call, no meeting, no room, no name, no chair, just wet sand and cold air and the sound of water I could not see clearly. And the words I had spoken as a joke sitting in my chest like something that had weight. I stood there for a while, I don't know how long. Long enough for my coat to feel heavier with the moisture in the air. Long enough for my fingers to go stiff inside my pockets. Long enough to stop expecting my phone to vibrate. Then the wind stopped. Not slowly, it simply stopped. The leaves that had been moving became still. The sound of the air through the trees disappeared. Everything that had been providing background noise to the world around me went quiet at once. And for the first time that night, I realized I was no longer alone. I stood still. I did not turn around immediately. My hands were inside my coat pockets. I could hear the water. That was strange. Everything else had become very quiet. So quiet that the ocean seemed louder, as if it had moved closer, as if the rest of the world had stepped back, and only the water and I were still present. The ocean was still moving, but the wind was gone, and in the place where the wind had been, there was something else. A stillness that did not feel empty, a stillness that had presence in it. Wait. The way a room feels different when someone enters it, even before you turn to look. I took my hands out of my pockets. My fingers felt cold. Cold in the particular way that happens when you have been outside longer than you planned, and the chill has worked its way past the surface. Then I heard footsteps behind me. One, then another, slow, not rushed, not sneaking, not careful, just measured. The way a person walks when they are not in a hurry and they are not afraid. I turned. There was a man standing several steps away. At first I could not see his face clearly. The light was weak out here. What light there was came from somewhere behind the clouds, diffused and gray, the kind of light that lets you see shapes but not details. I could see the shape of his clothing. I could see his hands. They were at his sides, open. I could see that he was looking directly at me. I did not move. He did not move either. My first thought was practical. Someone had followed me from the house. A reporter, security from somewhere. Someone who had seen me leave and decided to follow. I looked toward the road. No car, no headlights, no security, no one standing at a distance watching. I looked back at him. He was still there. Something changed inside my chest. Not fear exactly. Something older than fear. Something that happens before the mind has words for it. A recognition that whatever was happening right now was not the kind of thing I had protocols for. I took one step backward. The sand shifted slightly under my shoe. The man took one step forward. I could see his face now, and I knew him. I cannot explain that sentence better than that. I knew him, not from a meeting, not from a photograph, not from a television screen or a news report or a book illustration, not from any place I could point to. There are things a person can recognize without being taught: a face, a voice, a particular quality of presence that does not need a name. I knew who was standing in front of me, the way you know when you are in danger, and the way you know when you are safe, without being told, without having to think about it, in the part of you that is older than thinking. My mouth became dry. I tried to speak. The words did not come. My throat tightened and nothing came out. I was standing on a cold beach in the middle of the night in a city far from home, with everything I had built in the process of falling apart, and I could not speak. He looked at me. There was no anger on his face. That surprised me. That is the honest truth. That surprised me more than his presence. I had said what I said on that television program. I had laughed when the audience laughed. I had leaned back in that chair and enjoyed the feeling of a room responding to my confidence. I had said those words in front of people, and I had meant them, and I had been glad I said them. And now the person I had said them about was standing 3 steps away from me on a dark beach, and there was no anger. After everything I had said, after the way I had spoken, after the laughter, after the cameras, after I had challenged him in front of an audience and laughed at my own challenge, after all of it, there was nothing on his face that looked like punishment, nothing that looked like the satisfaction of a powerful thing about to correct a small one. Nothing. He said my name, Zaid, just my name, not a title, not a correction, not a question, my name spoken the way a person says the name of someone they have known for a long time and have been waiting to speak to. I lowered my head. I could not look at him. I am a man who has looked at very difficult people in very difficult rooms and held eye contact without blinking. I have sat across from men who controlled enormous amounts of money and power, and I have not looked away. I looked away now. I looked at the sand between us. I looked at the place where the wet sand met the dry sand, and I focused on that line because I could not raise my eyes. He said, "You asked me to come." I closed my eyes. My knees became weak. Not the kind of weak that drops you, the kind of weak that reminds you that you are standing, and that standing requires something, and that you are not certain you still have it. I put one hand against the side of my body, pressing my arm against my ribs as if I could hold myself upright by holding myself together. I wanted to say that I had not meant it, but I had, not in the way I had meant it on the television program, not as a statement of faith or invitation. I had meant it in the way you mean something when you are alone in a dark room and everything is gone and your voice says something before your mind decides to let it. I had meant it in the way the body means things when the performance has stopped. I wanted to say that I had been joking. But sitting here now with wet sand under my shoes and the ocean behind him and my hands shaking inside my coat, I could not make that word hold. Joke. The word was hollow. It did not fit the shape of what was happening. I wanted to explain myself, to give context, to lay out the reasoning. That is what I do. That is what I have always done. I arrange information in a way that makes sense, and I present it clearly, and I make the room understand why I did what I did and why it was the right decision. That is the tool I have used my entire life. He did not ask for an explanation. He only said, "You were speaking to everyone. You were not speaking to me." I looked up. His face was calm, not cold, not distant, calm in the way that a steady thing is calm. The water behind him was still moving. I could hear it, the low, continuous sound of it, wave after wave, as if the world had not paused at all, only I had. I could hear my own breathing. It was uneven. I became aware of it the way you become aware of your own heartbeat when the room is too quiet. I said, "Why me?" My voice came out smaller than I expected. Not the voice from the television, not the voice from the boardroom, something with no surface on it, just the question. He did not answer that. Instead, he said, "You wanted proof." I nodded. My chin moved down and then up, and I could not stop it, because it was true, under everything, under the jacket and the chair, and the carefully arranged sentence and the laughter, and the years of knowing exactly what to say and when to say it, under all of it. I had wanted to know. I had just never admitted that wanting could live inside certainty. I had always thought you were one or the other, certain or wanting. I did not know you could be both. I could not stop crying. That is not something I say easily. I do not say it as a signal that something important is happening. I say it because it is what happened. I had not cried in a very long time. I could not have told you the last time before that night, and now I could not stop. My face was wet, not from the mist. I covered my face with both hands. I had spent my entire life learning how to stand straight, how to speak without fear, how to hide weakness before anyone could see it, how to keep my face calm when other people were watching, how to use the arrangement of my body and the steadiness of my voice and the control of my expression as tools, the same way I used words and data and influence as tools. I had been doing it so long and so completely that I had stopped noticing I was doing it. Now there was no one watching, except him, and I could not hide anything. The thing that had always worked did not work here. The surface that I had spent 42 years building was simply not present. It had not broken. It was not there. Standing in front of him, it was as if that surface had never existed, as if he was looking at something that had always been underneath it and had never needed the surface to begin with. I lowered my hands. He was still looking at me. There was no accusation in it, no judgment of the kind I had spent a lifetime preparing to defend against. Only knowledge, the kind of knowledge that does not need you to explain yourself, because it was already there before you arrived. I felt known, not watched, not assessed, not measured against a standard. Known, as in fully seen and not diminished by the seeing. That is the only way I can describe it, and it is not an adequate description. But it is the closest I have. He said one more thing. You do not have to defend yourself with me. Then he became still. I stared at him. My whole chest was moving with my breathing. I wanted to ask 100 questions. About my family. About what would happen to them when they found out. About my money. What was left of it, and what had gone, and whether any of it mattered now. About my life, the shape of it, what it had been, and what it would be from here. About the things I had been taught, since I was old enough to be taught anything, the framework I had been handed and had carried without question. About what would happen tomorrow, and the day after, and every day that came after that, in a world where I had said what I had said on a television program, and then stood on a beach and wept in front of the person I had said it about. But none of those questions came out. The only thing I could say was, "Please don't leave." My voice broke on the last word, not dramatically, just the way a voice breaks when it has nothing left behind it to keep it steady. His eyes stayed on me, and then the world changed again. The wind returned, not violently, the same way it had stopped, quietly, without ceremony. The trees began to move again. I could hear their sound returning, low and continuous, the familiar background of the world. The sound of the ocean became louder. Everything that had been held still began again. I blinked. He was gone. I stood there for several seconds. I looked around the beach in both directions, the dark water to my left. The path behind me, the low wall at the top of the slope. Nothing. I was alone. There were footprints in the wet sand, not mine. I took one step toward them, then another. I stopped. I looked at them for a moment. I did not follow. I simply stood there. My coat was wet from the mist. My hands were shaking, not from cold. From something else, something that had no name that I had been taught. I looked toward the dark water. The waves were moving the same way they had been moving when I arrived. The world looked exactly the same as it had before, and I was entirely different inside it. And I said the first honest prayer of my life. Jesus, if that was you, I am here. No ceremony, no arrangement, no positioning of language for effect. Just those words, standing on cold sand with a wet coat and shaking hands and a face I had stopped trying to control. Then I sat down in the sand. I did not plan to. My legs made the decision before I did. I sat with my knees up and my coat around me and the water in front of me and the darkness above me. I stayed there until the sky began to change, until the black became gray and the gray became the first faint trace of something that was going to be light. When I returned to the house, the sun was coming up. I took off my coat, I put it over a chair, I walked into the kitchen, filled a glass with water, drank it. Then I picked up my phone. There were 37 missed calls. I did not return any of them. I opened a browser. I typed 2 words, Jesus Gospel. I read until the sun was high. Then I read again. I did not tell anyone what had happened, not that day. The next morning I opened the same pages. Then again the day after. I began carrying a small Bible with me. I kept it inside a drawer, then inside my bag. Then I stopped hiding it. I found a small Christian gathering in Sydney. I went there one evening. I sat in the back. No one knew who I was. That was exactly what I wanted. An older man sat beside me. He did not ask my name. He did not ask where I came from. He simply moved his chair slightly so there was room. The meeting began. I listened. Nobody shouted. Nobody tried to impress me. Nobody asked me for money. Nobody asked about my family. When it ended, I stood up. The older man looked at me. You coming next week? I nodded. Yes. He smiled. Good. That was all. I returned the next week, and the week after that. Then one night, I stayed after everyone left. The older man was stacking chairs. I said, "I need to tell you something." He stopped. I told him about the shoreline. I told him what Jesus had said. I told him I did not know what to call it. He did not tell me what to call it either. He just listened. When I finished, he said, "You don't need to prove it to me." I looked at him. He continued stacking chairs. "You need to decide what you are going to do with it." I thought about that for a long time. Then I said, "I know." This morning I woke before sunrise. The house was quiet. I made coffee. I stood by the kitchen window while the water boiled. There are no television cameras here now. No interview lights. No people waiting for me to say something clever. Just a kitchen, a cup, a window, the sound of traffic beginning outside. I still have problems. Some of my family still do not understand what happened to me. Some do not want to discuss it. Some think I have lost my mind. There are days when I wonder what the future will cost me. That part is still unresolved. I would be lying if I said I am no longer afraid. I am. But fear does not make my decisions for me anymore. I pray. I read. I meet with people who know what I believe now. I try to help people quietly. There was a time when I would have walked past a person asking for help because I was too busy. Now I stop. Not every time. I am still learning, but I stop more often. Last month, I received a message from someone who had seen the interview. He wrote, "I remember what you said about Jesus." I stared at the message for several minutes. Then another message came. He said he had been struggling with his own faith. He asked me what changed. I did not know how to answer him, so I wrote, "I was alone when I finally stopped pretending I knew everything." I sent it. Then I put the phone down. I did not know if he would answer. He did. He wrote, "Please pray for me." I sat there with the phone in my hand and I prayed. Sometimes I still go back to the shoreline, not because I expect him to appear again. I don't. I go because I remember the man I was standing there that night. The sand was cold, my coat was wet, my hands were shaking, and I had nothing left to say. Now, when I stand there, I usually bring coffee. I sit on the same stretch of sand. I watch the water. I listen to the wind. And I remember those words, "You do not have to defend yourself with me." I still carry things I have not solved. There are people I have not spoken to. There are doors I do not know whether I will ever walk through again. But I am still here. And if there is something you have been carrying quietly, something you have been afraid to say out loud, you can leave it in the comments. You do not have to explain everything. Just write what you want us to pray for. I will read them, and I will pray. I almost kept this story to myself. For a long time, I thought silence would be safer, but perhaps someone needs to know that they can come to God without having the right words. Perhaps someone is standing alone tonight the way I was. If stories like this help you hold on when you are struggling, you are welcome to stay with us. The water is still moving outside my window as I write this. The coffee beside me has gone cold. I don't mind. I can make another cup. There is time.